Go over this really quick. I want to make sure everybody has a full command of objects going forward. And like I was telling you before, if you don't devote a significant amount of your attention span to the concept of an object, semester 2 is going to be really difficult. Semester 2 can actually be super easy and fun if we get this right. So let's make sure we're devoting as much of our attention span as we can to getting this right. So what I like to compare learning programming to in general is learning to give basic instructions to somebody from another planet, right? Somebody from another planet's not going to get any of your social references, doesn't have vocabulary for things like refrigerators, TVs, cars, that kind of a thing, right? So let's say I had to give an alien instructions to, like, hey, go get me that jug of milk in the refrigerator. He has to know what milk is and what it does, where it comes from, what you do with it, right? He also has to know what a refrigerator is, what that does, where the milk's located in the refrigerator, all those kinds of things, right? So we have to define objects, and it's really kind of the same thing with computers. We have to define something, and whenever we come up with a class, say public class, and public is the access type, and it just means that we can access it from the outside. What I do to the way that I compare objects is, I would say an object is like having a set of blueprints and all the parts necessary to build something, right? So let's say you had a set of blueprints and all the parts for a clock. Can you just take that blueprint and parts and go and tell the time? No, you have to build the clock, right? You have to build the clock first, and then you do that. So let's say I have, the best example to use as far as like your first object to build is usually a user. So I'm going to call mine user. So let's call it public class user. And I'm going to start building some instance variables for my user. Number one, I would probably want like let's say, and I would probably want a user ID. Okay, that's pretty standard. And I'm making all these variables private type access, so they cannot be accessed from the outside without a specific set of controls. Let's string, and I want a username. Let's just keep it simple. I'll do username, and I'll set up a password. Okay. So these are in programming. These are called either fields or instance variables. It just means that you can use these anywhere in the class or in the object, right? So whenever you add a feature to your object or to your class, you can pull this data from anywhere in that class. You can use that data for pretty much whatever you want. Then I'm going to say public, or no, let's go with our constructor. So we'll build our constructors next. Key indicating feature of the constructor is what? It is the exact same name as the class, right? I'm going back and forth between Python. Can't remember how to declare. So constructor, is it public user? So I'm building, right? And then I declare my data types. Username, let's go with string UN, and my password string password, right? Now, why am I not putting a parameter in here for user ID. I definitely don't want to pull that in from the outside, right? I would probably set a user ID to something random. So I would say, let's say times, go with 4 9s. I think this works. Let's go with 4 9s, and then I'll add 1,000 to whatever comes out of there. And if it doesn't work out, at least I'll have a super long user ID that'll work out well. So basically, I want like a 4-digit user ID. We'll come up with a better solution for that later. So there's my user ID, username just equals UN. We're pulling that from the outside, and password PW. Everybody's with me so far. So distinguishing feature, right? Exact same name as the class and no return type at all, not even void, right? That's why we have to have the same name as the class so that Java recognizes that that is your constructor and that you don't need a return type. Now, the other thing we need here is a default constructor. Now, the interesting thing about constructors and methods is that Java will allow these to have the same names, right? As long as the parameters are different for whatever reason, different types of parameters, a different number of parameters, anything like that. And that process is called overloading, right? This has a set of parameters, which is basically nothing, and I can overload that with more parameters if I choose to do that. Now, there's a specific reason that this is the case, and we'll go over that later. But in this case, with constructors, there's one reason we do that, and that is because we want to set default values. We want to set reasonable default values on things in case there's a situation where some of these objects get created without the data going in, right? So if somehow data failed to get pulled from the outside, we have these backup default values, and we can always go back in and correct things once our objects are created using a different set of tools, okay? So we have these sort of reasonable default values for things. And in fact, I probably want to put user ID in there as well. User ID, we can generate both times. And what's going to happen is this. The reason these can get away with both having the same name at this point is because Java is going to decide at runtime which one to use. So if I declare this user here, user A equals new user, you see that I have no parameter data there. Java is going to decide at runtime, hey, I'm going to use this version of user. If I create a user like this, where you see I have parameter data, Java is going to decide at runtime, hey, I'm going to use this one. They don't interfere with each other in that way, so they can get away with being the same name. Questions on that so far? Yes. Why is there 3 parameters? I think I had first name and last name here. So in a previous run of this, I probably had something else. So let's just say that's my password. So that's a good call on that. We'll just do that. Okay. So we have 2 parameters. When I create those users, like I said, it's going to decide at runtime, hey, I'm going to use the one with data or without data. Once our object is created, this is a key bit of understanding. Okay, this is these constructors. This is why they don't have a return type. we don't have to declare anything else, and they have the same username, or they have the same name as the class, is because they disappear once the object's created. So once I create this user object A, right, once it's done creating, it no longer possesses the constructors. They go away, okay? So what happens if I want to change any of this data? Well, what's smart to do whenever you're building an object is to create something called the modifier. Public void, and then I'm going to call them set. Let's just say set username, and I can pull some data in from the outside, right? Let's go string un, and it basically does all the exact same things as the constructor. So if you think about it, what I do here. So your modifier or your setter does the exact same thing as the constructor with one key difference. Big key difference here is that this I'm able to run again once the object's been created. So if you see here, I create a new object called user B, right? I also still have this user A. I can go back into A and I can say set username, right? Or set probably values would be a better name for that, right? And I can set data values there, right? What's that?
Yeah, on all three of these, just on these construction modifiers, you have the get thing.
So we'll deal with that in a second. We'll deal with that in a second. So just disregard, just focus on what these things do. Why would I want to leave this out of here? I just deleted the user ID, right? Do I want to pull a new user ID from the outside? If you give somebody a permanent user ID, is that something that you typically want them to change? Okay, that is the entire reason that we create objects this way. It's almost the one major reason that encapsulation exists in Java at all is because of this reason. I want to control access to all these data members, right? I have all this data. Some of it I want the user to be able to change it from the outside. Some of them I want just to be permanent, and that's your data, right? This is how we control that. Through modifiers, what we choose to include in modifiers controls the kind of access that you get. Now, as far as retrieving data, we can control access one more time by using setters. Let's see what's my time here. All right, we're running low on time. We'll do the rest of this when you guys come back. If you're working on labs at home, I'll post this video up. Just make sure you take a look at it if you run into trouble conceptually with anything.